You got to understand when it comes to these former great athletes and players, part of what got them there is, bordering that line of confidence and arrogance, as well as elite competitiveness for the most part with these guys. And that competitiveness, that confidence, that bravado, they carry that through the rest of their lives. And you're seeing a lot of these former players now, podcasts, the new media, all that. I enjoy a lot of it. It gives us more to talk about. But, Gilbert Arenas, Paul Pierce, some of these guys have no shame, right? Like, and they're just out of pocket for clickbait, which is kind of lame because I don't think they need to do that, right? But one guy who isn't on the scene trying to do that and is just, speaking his mind was good old Rasheed Wallace. Rasheed Wallace, who was one of the more talented big men in, the early 2000s, 90s, the last era, bounced around a lot for how talented he was, right? But somehow the discussion was brought up, hey, 17 Warriors versus the 04 Pistons. What does that look like? How does that go? Well, Rasheed said, it wouldn't even be, we'd wipe the floor with him. We'd mop him up. And then, Draymond's going to fire back and say, Sheed, fam, like 70 points isn't even enough and a half against us. This is the KD version, the year one, where KD was happy, right? And again, the competitiveness never leaves these guys. So they're always going to say that, right? But if we're looking at that Pistons team, like, first off, they cut, and you could do this, I guess, with every championship team and look at the breaks they caught. And they were one of the deeper teams. They kind of broke the mold of what championship teams look like, right? Because it was depth. It was a strength and numbers team, maybe one of the first versions of that. And then we saw the 15 Warriors, right? But the 17 Warriors weren't that, right? This was, again, Durant. And Detroit, they beat a very torn apart Lakers team, right? This was the Lakers team. They had Malone, Peyton, Shaq and Kobe were at the end. And by the time they got to the finals, they just had no cohesiveness. The Lakers were playing themselves as well in that matchup. But the Pistons, after acquiring Rasheed Wallace at the midseason point, they had the depth. You got Ben Wallace, multiple defensive player of the year. Tayshaun Prince, one of the more elite wing defenders in the league at the time. Mr. Big Shot, Chauncey Billups was the head of the snake. And then you had Rip Hamilton, one of the best off-ball jump shooters in the game. Now, y'all already know where I'm going to go with this, right? Like, to me, listen, Rip Hamilton wore a mask to feel safe on the court. Like, when a guy breaks his nose, right, they wear the mask for a couple weeks. Rip Hamilton wore it for years. It was like a blankie for him. It was like a little teddy bear, right? So I don't want to hear about Rip versus Clay. I don't want to hear about it. Like we can start there. He needed he felt more safe with this. It was like Ricky Williams. Remember Ricky Williams with the helmet on and there was something to that. Like, I'm not taking away from his game, but the other part of it was what he did at the elbow and the nail, Clay does at the 3-point line. Bigger, stronger, tougher, better. Boom. Right? Now, Rasheed Wallace, listen, you could argue as talented as anybody in this matchup. Problem is, was there not a day that went by that he wasn't high? Right? He was just too sporadic as far as his professionalism and what type of Sheed were you going to get. Ben Wallace was definitely going to get the Tony Allen treatment, right? He was going to be the guy that they roamed off of. Now, he was going to hurt him on the glass and be physical. And, Tayshaun Prince, again, one of the better wing defenders. And if you're too young to know who he was, I mean, listen, he's built, think KD like 2-3 inches shorter and like half the talent. So when you talk about that matchup, no, I think that in all seriousness, Tayshaun is would be a good matchup for KD as far as if you were finding a guy to defend KD, Tayshaun would probably hold up pretty well. And I think defensively, their length, it could cause problems. But ultimately, when you get to that point guard matchup with Chauncey Billups and Steph Curry, I think one of two things would happen. I think Chauncey, he hung his hat on his defense. He later became Mr. Big Shot. But I think what would happen is Chauncey would get worn out chasing Steph through all those screens and all that off-ball stuff, and he wouldn't have the legs to be Mr. Big Shot on the other end. And so, obviously I can't look at this objectively being, part of Dub Nation, but nah. Sorry. Sorry, y'all. But again, I'm not surprised about that. But I wanted to start with that topic, catch y'all's attention. There's some other things to talk about. We've got the finals starting tomorrow. Got big news from Underdog Fantasy headed into these finals. Pick 8. Previously, 5 picks was the max. Well, you can add 3 more to it. 8 picks are possible now with up to 325 times your money. Now, there's different ways of going about that, but if you're feeling frisky, I know a lot of people like to play the game that way, where there's a little something on it, right? But you hit that huge multiplier. Well, now you have the ability to go up to 8 picks, and they're running a ton of specials, some baseball specials if you watch baseball. But for basketball, game 2, they're going to have a Kyrie special, half a point higher or lower. So you can throw that into the 8 picks. You can make it some sort of, again, y'all have been playing with me all season long, and I appreciate you for that. But the new pick 8, I think, is a big deal headed into the finals, WNBA, Olympics, and we're going to talk Caitlin Clark here in a minute. But as far as these finals go, I'm rooting for Dallas. Full transparency, Jason Kidd was a childhood hero of mine, and I kind of like this Kyrie redemption arc. Luka, as annoying as he can be when you're facing him, is a generational talent. I think we're seeing at this point, right? And I don't like Boston. It's easy to root against Boston. But I do think if KP is healthy, which that is a big if, he's going to be out of shape, right? But I think if he can play and be, 80% of what we expect him to be, I like Boston in 6. That's my pick, but I'm rooting for Dallas. And you will be able to catch all those breakdowns on my Patreon. I will tap in here on YouTube and give you my thoughts as well. But if you want like all the highlights and the quarter by quarter takes, I encourage y'all to support the channel that way. I wanted to talk a little bit about this Caitlin Clark situation, man, because it's getting beyond sports, right? To me, in my opinion, and it's almost become political. And I wanted to share this tweet from at Kev on stage because I think he nailed it. He nailed it on the head. He said, Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese are doing for the WNBA what Bird and Magic did for the NBA. Rivalry plus race equals ratings. And to me at this point, again, it's almost become political instead of being able to objectively say what you've seen in the moment, it's like you have to pick a side and kind of ride with it. And I think in particular, the women in media, they're like, well, we got to pick this side, the black women especially, right? And you saw the foul Kennedy Carter laid on her, what was it, Saturday morning or something, right? It went viral. She's waiting for an inbound pass, big hockey shoulder check, and it just wasn't within the game, right? You can take those licks, but you got to do it kind of, the unwritten rule is you do it when someone's trying to go through a screen or you're boxing out on a rebound. You find a way to get a body shot or a hit on somebody, an elbow, playing within the game. And that one, the ball wasn't even inbounded yet. And so it was just like, yo, that's a little bit much, right? That's aggressive. But I think what was more interesting and more of the story was time and time again, Caitlin Clark's teammates kind of just looked the other way, right? They're not defending her. And I've heard, the pushback is, hey, they're grown women, they're tough. Like, why do they got to do that? She's like, da-da-da-da. Listen, all I know is I've stood up for some random guy in a pickup game more than what the Indiana Fever have done for Caitlin Clark. You're playing pickup and like some heart, you kind of walk, you're like, hey man, what's up? Like, we ain't playing like that. Like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? None of that from the Indiana Fever. I see a lot of Kobe and Caitlin Clark. She does have an attitude, right? She probably, it may not be the most likable. That is a common trait with these types of alpha dominant players. But ultimately, I think one of the issues is financially. I know this has been a big discussion, how much the women are making and, the NBA, all that stuff, right? But when you think about the 13th or 14th guy on an NBA roster, right? They are relatively eating. Right? They're making more money than most of all of us, even if you're on the end of the bench and barely on the roster in the NBA, right? And so there's a competitiveness depending on, what your goals and what you value are as far as staying in the league, winning, all that stuff, right? In the WNBA, First off, there's only like 12 teams, right? So these women are fighting to just stay in the league. That's why so many of them are playing, how old? Taurasi's like 50. But they're fighting to stay in the league, and they're also fighting for a salary that's just competitive for you and I, right? The salaries aren't enough. We know that. And so I think that makes, the hazing of the younger players and what they're being extra with Caitlin Clark is extreme. If all these girls, if the minimum salary in the WNBA was what the NBA was, I'm not saying the maxes. Let's not say they have like 200 maxes or anything. But if they're all making like $1 million, right? I don't think there would be this type of energy, not to this extreme. And again, it's become kind of political. Pick a side, and you have the media heads, people saying, like, objectively, the Kennedy Carter foul, that was extra. That was extra. And if you can't say that, then again, you've politically picked your side. And so I think that this was going to be an issue. I had brought this up weeks ago when she signed the Nike deal for $20 million. She is like worth more than the entire league combined. And that's going to be, that's just weird. It's just weird. It's a weird setup. And then she's this ultra alpha aggressive girl who doesn't care what you think. And now you have this, but hey, we're all tuned in, right? We're all tuned in. I would like to see Aaliyah Boston and her teammates step up and stand up for her a little bit. But if they're not, again, maybe that suggests her personality and they're not feeling her. But they might want to get somebody in there that will. The last bit of news I wanted to touch on here, sounds like JJ Redick is going to be the Lakers' next head coach. Very interesting, right? We're losing one of the better former players giving their takes on media heads, new media, right? Look, I like it if LeBron leaves, right? If he can kind of have a clean slate and LeBron leaves, I think JJ has a ton of potential as a coach. But if he stays, it's going to be a mess, man. It's going to be a mess. And, JJ is a fiery dude. He's a fiery dude. I expect him to get in the faces of guys, right? Especially with the pressure of LA. And if this is going down, there's one thing to do that. The other thing is can you do it with them still respecting you and having and you have their ear, right? It's a balancing act. You can, just go blazing in and be like this dictator and try to get in guys' face and be this strong authoritizing coach. But again, it's a balancing act, right? Pop, I think, is the greatest example, right? Where sometimes you see him interact with the players, his players, and you're like, dang, man, this fool he can be savage with them, right? But then when you listen to him and you watch like in a bigger picture, they all love him. They all love him. That's Pop's greatest trait, right? It's not X's and O's. It's the balancing of being hard on these guys when he needs to be, but they still love him, right? In that balancing act, I'm interested to see JJ try to find that. But I think if LeBron is in the room, it's going to be much harder to find that balance. But another storyline and more drama to follow next season. Game 1, again, tomorrow in Boston. I'll be covering that, and I will have more underdog picks. I don't know about 8 picks for myself, but hey, I know a lot of y'all like to play that way, so go check that out. Link in the description. Hit that like, share, and subscribe. I'm out, y'all.